My name is Daniel. I'm 24, and this is the story I've never told anyone. I call it, I was painting her fence when she whispered, "If I were younger, I'd ask you to stay." I still remember the way the sunlight cut through the late summer haze that day. I was standing in her yard, a paintbrush in my hand, the scent of fresh cedar staining the air. It wasn't my yard, and it wasn't my fence. It was hers, Mrs. Whitmore's. She was my boss's wife. The company I worked for, a small contracting business, had me running odd jobs outside of construction hours. My boss, Gary, liked to keep his employees busy when he wasn't around. It wasn't exactly legal or fair, but I needed the work. I was drowning in student debt, and taking care of my mom's hospital bills meant every dollar mattered. Gary was the kind of man who smiled with his teeth but never his eyes. Quick-tempered, always half-drunk by noon, and merciless with deadlines. Everyone who worked under him knew his temper was worse at home. The whispers around the site were that his wife, Anna, had learned to live in silence. Anna was different from him. She carried herself with quiet grace, like a melody no one could hear unless they listened closely. She was maybe in her mid-40s, elegant in a way that didn't fade with age, her hair always tied back loosely as if she couldn't be bothered to fuss over it anymore. That afternoon, she brought me lemonade, the kind with crushed ice and just enough sugar to taste like memory. She stood on the porch, watching me paint the fence, her hands resting lightly against the wooden rail. "You work too hard, Daniel," she said softly. I laughed, brushing a streak of white across the slats. "That's what your husband pays me for." Her smile faltered at the mention of him. It was quick, almost invisible, but I noticed. I always noticed with her. The truth was, I shouldn't have been noticing anything. She was my boss's wife, twice my age, and completely out of reach. But something about her presence slowed the chaos in my head. I didn't feel like a contractor's grunt when she spoke to me. I felt like someone worth listening to. As the sun dipped lower, the cicadas droning, she walked toward me. Her sandals crunched against the gravel, and she stood on the other side of the fence I was painting, close enough that I could see the faint lines around her eyes, the kind that spoke of laughter long forgotten. And then she leaned in slightly and whispered, almost as if confessing to herself, "If I were younger, I'd ask you to stay." My brush froze mid-stroke. My heart thudded in my chest like a hammer striking steel. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. She straightened quickly, her face unreadable. The words hung between us, fragile and dangerous, like glass waiting to shatter. That night I couldn't sleep. Her voice replayed in my head, soft but charged with something I couldn't name. It wasn't just attraction, it was longing. A longing that shouldn't have been directed at me. The next morning at work, Gary barked orders at me across the site, as if nothing was wrong. He didn't know. He couldn't know. Still, every time his wife's name slipped past his lips, I flinched. At lunch, one of the older guys, Mike, sat beside me. He was missing 2 fingers from a saw accident years ago, and he had this gruff wisdom about him. "You've been spending time at Whitmore's place, huh?" he said, biting into a sandwich. I nodded cautiously. "Painting the fence." He chuckled darkly. "Careful, kid. That house is a coffin with curtains. Don't let yourself get trapped in there." I didn't ask what he meant. Maybe I already knew. A week later, I was back at their property, this time fixing a section of the deck. Gary had gone on a business trip, or so he claimed. Anna came out again, this time with 2 cups of coffee instead of lemonade. "Sit for a while," she said gently, gesturing to the porch steps. I hesitated, but the exhaustion in my muscles won. I set my hammer down and joined her. For a few minutes, we just sat in silence, sipping the bitter coffee as the wind stirred the trees. Then she spoke. "Do you ever feel like your life isn't your own, Daniel? Like you're living a script someone else wrote for you?" Her words hit me deeper than I expected. I thought of my father walking out when I was 12, of my mother working 2 jobs until she got sick, of me taking every job I could find just to keep us afloat. A script I hadn't written, but one I was forced to follow. "Every day," I admitted quietly. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw tears glint at the corners. She looked away quickly, pretending to focus on the horizon. It was in that moment I realized her whisper about me staying wasn't just flirtation. It was a crack in her armor. Plea, maybe even a warning. That night, as I packed up my tools, she walked me to my truck. The sky was bruised with twilight, cicadas giving way to crickets. She stopped me before I opened the door. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling slightly, If you ever hear things in this house that don't sound right, promise me you'll walk away. Don't get involved." Her words confused me. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the way she looked at me, like someone staring down the edge of a secret too heavy to carry, silenced me. I nodded. She gave a faint, almost invisible smile. Then she stepped back into the shadows of the porch, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. For days I couldn't shake it. The way she whispered to me, the warning, the sadness in her eyes, and somewhere beneath it all, the undeniable pull I felt toward her. Something dangerous, something real. I should have stayed away. I should have buried myself in work and kept my head down. But instead, I found myself looking for excuses to drive by her house, to see if she was outside, to catch even a glimpse of her silhouette behind the curtains. And then, one evening, I saw something I wish I hadn't. Her figure was in the window, but she wasn't alone. She was standing with a man who wasn't Gary. His hand gripped her arm too tightly. Her body language was stiff, frightened. Before I could process what I was seeing, the curtains snapped shut. And just like that, I knew. Whatever Anna had been hinting at, whatever darkness lived inside that house, I was already tangled in it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her silhouette in that window, the stranger's hand gripping her arm. My mind spun with questions. Who was he? A family friend? A relative? Or something darker? By morning, my chest felt heavy with a mixture of dread and something else I wasn't ready to admit, fear for her. At work, Gary was back from his so-called business trip. He stormed around the site, yelling at the crew, a beer already in his hand, though it wasn't even noon. He didn't say a word to me except to bark out orders, but I kept catching myself staring at him, wondering if he knew, wondering if he was the danger she had been warning me about. By lunchtime, I made up my mind. I drove back to their neighborhood, telling myself I'd just drive past. Nothing more. When I turned the corner onto their street, my pulse jumped. Gary's truck wasn't in the driveway, but another car was. Black, sleek, expensive. Not the kind of car you usually saw parked in front of houses like theirs. I parked further down the road, pretending to check something on my phone. Then I saw him, the same man from the window. Mid-40s, well-dressed, his jaw sharp and clean-shaven. He stepped out of the front door like he owned it. He wasn't smiling. Anna followed him onto the porch. She was tense, her shoulders drawn tight. When he reached for her arm again, she flinched. He leaned in close, said something I couldn't hear, then walked off toward his car. She stood there, frozen, until his taillights disappeared down the street. I almost got out of my truck. Almost. But something stopped me. Maybe her warning echoed too loudly in my head. Don't get involved. That night I couldn't eat. My hands shook as I tried to hold a fork at dinner. Mom noticed. She always noticed. "Danny, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice weary but gentle. "Nothing," I lied, forcing a smile. But inside, it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like I was carrying someone else's secret, and it was slowly eating me alive. The next day, I was back at their property, tasked with fixing a leak in the roof. Gary had left me there alone again. Anna brought me a glass of water, her hands trembling slightly as she set it down beside me. "You saw him, didn't you?" she whispered, her eyes searching mine. I hesitated, then nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. That was my brother, but her voice cracked in a way that made me doubt it instantly. "Anna," I said softly, "if you need help." "No," she cut me off quickly, shaking her head. "I told you not to get involved. I should have stopped. I should have respected her wall. But I couldn't." "Why? He grabbed you. He scared you." Why won't you let me help? Her eyes glistened. For a moment, she looked like she might break open, spill everything. But then she drew a sharp breath and turned away. You're young, she said, her voice steadying. You don't understand the cost of crossing certain lines. I wanted to push further, but she walked back inside, leaving me standing on the porch with nothing but the echo of her words. That evening, as I packed up, she reappeared. This time, she looked different. Her hair undone, her face pale, as if the weight of whatever she carried was pressing harder than usual. Daniel, she whispered, her voice almost breaking. Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you'd made one different choice? I swallowed. Every day, her eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The air between us was thick with unspoken things. Fear, longing, desperation. Then, with a shaky breath, she said the words that haunted me long after. If I were younger, I wouldn't just whisper it. I'd beg you to stay. I didn't know what to do with that. Part of me wanted to reach for her, to tell her she wasn't alone, that I'd stay no matter what. But another part, the rational part, screamed that this was dangerous, that getting closer to her meant stepping into quicksand. I forced myself to step back. Anna, I can't. Her face crumbled for just a second before she masked it with a smile. A sad, fragile smile. I know. She disappeared into the house again. 2 nights later, I was jolted awake by my phone buzzing. The caller ID was blocked. Against my better judgment, I answered. A voice whispered on the other end, Daniel, it's me, Anna. My chest tightened. What's wrong? Please? Can you come? Her voice was barely audible. I can't do this alone. I was already pulling on my jacket before she finished. When I arrived at her house, the porch light was off. The place looked deserted. My gut told me to turn around, but I pushed forward, knocking gently on the door. It opened a crack, and Anna's pale face appeared. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying for hours. She pulled me inside quickly, locking the door behind us. The house was dim, the air heavy with silence. She led me into the living room, where the curtains were drawn tight. She sat on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands. He'll be back, she whispered. And when he comes back, I don't know what he'll do. Who? I asked, my pulse hammering. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with terror. My brother. I wanted to believe her, but something about the way she said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I crouched down in front of her, lowering my voice. Anna, if you're in danger, we need to call the police. She shook her head violently. No police. You don't understand, Daniel. If you get involved, he'll ruin you. He'll ruin us both. Before I could answer, headlights swept across the curtains. A car pulling into the driveway. Anna's face went white. He's here, she whispered, her voice trembling. You have to hide. My chest tightened as the sound of a car door slamming echoed outside. Heavy footsteps approached the porch, and just as I ducked into the shadowed corner of the room, the front door creaked open. The man from before stepped inside. His presence filled the room like a storm. His eyes scanned the space, sharp and calculating. Anna stood, her voice shaking. You shouldn't be here, he smirked. You always say that. My heart pounded as I pressed myself deeper into the shadows. I shouldn't have been there, but it was too late. I was caught in something far bigger and far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The man stepped farther into the living room, his polished shoes echoing against the hardwood. My pulse thundered in my ears, every muscle in my body rigid as I pressed myself deeper into the shadows behind the armchair. Anna stood frozen in front of him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. You shouldn't be here, she repeated, her voice trembling. He smirked. And yet, here I am. Did you really think you could keep me out forever? I couldn't see his face fully in the dim light, but his presence radiated power. Controlled, dangerous power. Leave, she said, louder this time. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a cutting whisper. You're forgetting who paid for all this. You're forgetting what you owe me. Anna flinched, her shoulders hunching as if the words themselves struck her. I couldn't stay hidden. Not anymore. My instinct to protect her burned hotter than my fear. I shifted, stepping out from the shadows. "Back away from her," I said, my voice firm though my hands shook. Both of them whipped their heads toward me. Anna's eyes widened with horror. The man's narrowed with a slow, dangerous smile. Well, he said smoothly. "And who's this?" "Daniel," Anna's voice cracked. "You shouldn't have come." The man took a step toward me, studying me like a predator sizing up prey. "One of Gary's boys, huh? Figures. Always sniffing around where they don't belong." Something about the way he said it, casual, dismissive, ignited anger in me. "I'm not going to let you hurt her." He laughed softly, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Hurt her? Kid, you have no idea what you've walked into." The room was thick with tension. I felt trapped, a pawn in a game I didn't understand. Finally, Anna's voice broke the silence. "Stop, both of you." Her eyes locked on mine, pleading. "Daniel, please go. You can't save me from this. You'll only destroy yourself." But I couldn't leave. Not after everything. Not after the whispers, the warnings, the moments where her sadness bled through the cracks of her composure. "Tell me the truth, Anna," I said, my voice shaking but determined. "Who is he really?" Her lips trembled. She looked at the man, then back at me, and finally the truth spilled out. "He's not my brother," she whispered. "He's Gary's partner. In everything. Business and debts. They own me, Daniel. They own this house, my life, everything I have." The man smiled, as if her confession amused him. Finally, some honesty. The floor seemed to fall out from beneath me. The pieces clicked into place. Gary's sudden business trips, Anna's whispered warnings, the expensive car that didn't fit the neighborhood. She wasn't just lonely. She was trapped in something darker. "Daniel," she said, her voice breaking, "you don't understand. If you fight this, they'll come after you. They'll come after your family." My chest tightened at the mention of my mom. I thought of her hospital bed, her frail hands gripping mine. Could I really put her at risk? The man leaned closer, his voice low and cutting. "She's right, kid. Walk away while you still can. Pretend you never heard a word. That's the smart choice." For a moment I faltered. Fear clawed at my throat. He was right, I was nothing compared to them. Just a 24-year-old kid with debts and a sick mother. What power did I have? But then I looked at Anna, at the way her hands trembled, at the sorrow etched into her face. And I knew I couldn't be silent. Not anymore. "I won't walk away," I said quietly. "I won't let you keep her like this." The man's eyes darkened. For a second, I thought he might strike me. But instead, he smiled, a cold, cruel smile. "You've just signed your own sentence," he murmured, then turned to Anna. "You'd better teach your little toy some manners." With that, he walked out, the door slamming behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The silence that followed was unbearable. Anna collapsed onto the sofa, her face buried in her hands. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "You don't understand what he's capable of." I knelt beside her, my hand hovering uncertainly near hers. "Because someone had to. Because you deserve more than living in fear." Her tears slipped through her fingers. "And what about your life, Daniel? Your mother? What happens when they decide you've become a problem?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the thought of leaving her, of pretending she wasn't suffocating in that house, was worse than the fear of what might come. Days passed in a blur after that night. At work, Gary acted the same. Angry, volatile, oblivious. But every time he mentioned his partner, my stomach twisted. I knew now who he was talking about. I avoided Anna's house, though it killed me. I thought distance might protect us both. But one evening, I found an envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. No name, just my own shaky reflection in the glass as I pulled it open. Inside was a single note, scrawled in neat handwriting. "You can't save her. Walk away." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. The last time I saw Anna was 3 weeks later. I was leaving the job site when she appeared in the parking lot, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She pulled me aside, out of earshot from the others. "Daniel," she whispered, clutching my hand. "You have to stop. Please, forget me." "I can't," I said, my chest aching. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Then it'll destroy you, and I couldn't bear that." She pressed something into my palm, a small, folded piece of paper. Then she turned and walked away before I could stop her. When I unfolded the paper later, my breath caught. It was a simple message, written in her graceful handwriting. "Thank you for seeing me, when no one else did. That's all I ever wanted. Be free, Daniel. Live the life I never could." I never saw her again after that. Rumors spread that Gary sold the company, that he and his partner moved out of town. Some whispered that Anna had left with them. Others said she'd been sent away somewhere, hidden. I never found out the truth, but I still think about her. The woman who whispered secrets across a painted fence. The woman who, for a brief, fleeting moment, made me believe in a connection deeper than fear. Reflection. Looking back now, I realize I couldn't save her. Not in the way I wanted. Sometimes, love isn't about rescue. Sometimes it's about witness. About being the one who says, "I see you. You're not invisible." Anna taught me that. She taught me that even in the darkest places, a whisper of kindness can matter more than a shout of defiance. And though she's gone, her words remain etched in me. If I were younger, I'd ask you to stay. I wasn't able to stay for her, but I can stay for myself, for my mother, for the life I still have to build. Because in the end, the most dangerous prison isn't built of fences or debts. It's built of silence, and I refuse to live in silence anymore.